Now, the ANC's National Executive Committee met this very weekend, and while we're not sure what the outcomes were, we know the step-aside issue was discussed. Last year, the party's highest decision-making body said members facing criminal charges should step aside. And this will impact ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule, who is relying on support from branches. But branches will be important for the party as it gears up for local government elections. So let's unpack all of this with political analyst. We're joined now by Sandile Swana, who joins us all the way from right here in Johannesburg. Mr. Swana, good morning to you and thank you so much for your time. We'll get into the step-aside issue in just a moment, but any word, at least from your side, in terms of what the outcomes are expected to be coming from this ANC-NEC meeting?
Yes. First of all, I think a lot of us are aware that there are a number of issues that need to be dealt with, that would have had to be dealt with. One of them being the improvement of the vaccination, the COVID-19 vaccination program, the issue of the funding of the universities, the issue of power supply, electricity power supply across the nation, which is in crisis. So there are a number of issues that affect you and I on a daily basis that, as a ruling party, they needed to have discussed. The issue of the soapy and the drama of the step aside and so on, it's interesting, but it is not our bread and butter. But indeed, those are the types of issues that would expect them to say something about, because those are the issues that threaten our lives and our livelihood.
Right. And also, I mean, as we expect the local government election to take gear quite soon, how important are these issues that you've named, you know, when it comes to student protests, when it comes to student funding, when it comes to, you know, issues around leadership crisis within the ANC? How important is it for the ANC to address them ahead of these local government elections?
In history, in many parts of the world, once you have a deep economic and financial crisis, like you have in South Africa today, the student protests, for example, a manifestation of that, that thing could actually impact the change of government in the process of time. You cannot allow an economic and financial crisis to persist in a country. In terms of the elections themselves, the local government elections, the most decisive factor for the time being is that there must be no breakaway group from the ANC. The ANC must grow with one electoral slate, let me put it that way, because what killed them in the 2016 election was when some of the leaders of the African National Congress told their own supporters not to go to the polls and boycott the polls. That then gave the DA and the EFF an opportunity to take power in the metros.
Right. You mentioned then the step-aside issue, which I think, you know, has been a hot conversation even on social media. We heard from, you know, former President Thabo Mbeki as well. Word and reports coming in that he too said, you know, the SG's office is quite weakened. I mean, Mr. Swana, what do you think particularly about the step-aside issue? Is it overshadowing other issues within the ANC, or is it an important issue for the ANC to address, particularly when we look at the SG's Magashule as well as other, you know, political officials within the ANC, with which the likes of Mavuso Msimang said people should not necessarily be isolated. If people are going to step aside, or an individual is going to step aside, then all those incriminated in corruption should also take the same route.
Yes, that is the correct perspective. The step-aside resolution in its current form, it's actually designed to misdirect South Africans completely. The problems in the ANC that we are experiencing in their mature form today were clearly identified by Nelson Mandela when he was the president of the African National Congress, and he made clear suggestions of what must be done. At the time, the two powerful individuals in the ANC who were the most energetic was Cyril Ramaphosa and Thabo Mbeki, and they never did anything to resolve those issues that were there. What are these issues? The first issue is that within the ANC, the admission system of admitting members and retaining members had allowed an assortment of criminals, criminal businessmen and career opportunistic politicians to enter in large numbers into the African National Congress. And Mandela identified this and said, these people must be removed, they must be expelled from the ANC. That was not done by Thabo Mbeki and by Cyril Ramaphosa, who had the power to do so at the time. The second thing is that when we started the democracy, there were systems of governance that were introduced that were consistently being violated and are still being consistently violated. If you take the last 7 years of Auditor General's reports, each one of those reports says clearly that recommendations of what must be corrected were put to the leaders, and the leaders consistently have ignored. That is what Kemi Magwetu has said. And at the same time, we must be aware that the corruption we're dealing with is corruption in business and corruption in the ANC, in the ruling party, and at every level of government. Whether you are talking about a clerk, or you are talking about a DG, or a minister, or even a member of parliament, the corruption is at every level in business, it's at every level in the ANC. So those are the issues that are systemic in nature. In other words, you have to restore governance at every level on a wholesale basis. And therefore, the targeting of specific individuals has got the effect of disguising the issue, because we will remove Isma Khashule for the sins of many in business, for the sins of many in the government. And then we say we've cleaned up government after we've removed Baha. There is nothing that we know of. For instance, all the recommendations of the Auditor General should have been the resolution of the African National Congress to say from now onwards we are going to implement all the recommendations of the AG. All of them, and not ignore one.
If I could just come in there, Mr. Swana. If I could just come in there, Mr. Swana, because...
And we do not have...
Because as you're talking, I'm thinking about, the two different factions. I mean, we know of, the factions that clearly exist within the ANC. Some, name the RET factions, some the CR17, factions. Do they regress or progress, the work of, the ANC, particularly in this critical time whereby the NEC meeting needs to take a stance, the top six of the ANC needs to take leadership. But how progressive or regressive are these two different factions?
The starting point of this issue of these factions is that from 2007, in the build-up to the Polokwane conference, that's when the birthing of these factions comes from. These factions won, and what I mean by this is the following. Isma Khashule, Gwede Mantashe were in the original Zuma faction. Cyril Ramaphosa joined the Zuma faction in 2012. So when you talk about the two factions, there is no other faction other than two factions that come out of the Zuma slate, both of them. Isma Khashule comes from the Zuma slate, Cyril Ramaphosa comes from the Zuma slate. And what we know for sure from the reports of the Auditor General and the reports of the Statistician General, Stats SA, is that since this whole group of them took over power in 2007, the economy of the country and the living conditions of South Africans have actually deteriorated. Since the 2017 conference in Nazareth, the conditions of living of South Africans have deteriorated faster than ever. In fact, we are now in levels of low living that were last seen around the World War II. It's record levels of low standards of living. So these two groups have not put any program on the table for systematic positive change. Neither group has put anything credible on the table to say they are going to improve their lives that we can all accept. The major economists in this country are totally in disagreement with the government in terms of where they want to go, the existing government. It's another matter of what they will comment about what the RET forces are proposing. So from my point of view, this is all in total regression.
All right.